мрій наше гасло. України діти ми.
Нехай Москва лежить в руїнах, а нам на це не чхати. Смерть, смерть москалям! Смерть, смерть москалям!
Yes, sir.
In 2017, NBC's Left Field posted a video about the Ukraine Azov Battalion summer training camp. You'll notice these are not military-age teenagers, and nor do they hold back in recreating war games and showing them how to operate military hardware. The video downplays their white supremacist and neo-Nazi ideology and insignia, but even CNN could admit that it was associated with white supremacist and neo-Nazi ideology and insignia. Their teams at the time found that Azov embraced these emblems and paraphernalia as part of their identity as well as part of their training. Now, supposedly integrated into the Ukrainian military in 2016, we see from NBC's video how they've run an annual children's summer camp, this in 2017, featuring rigorous military drills and hardline stance on national and ethnic identity.
В дитинстві взагалі немає уявлення, що таке війна, мабуть, і не задумуєшся. Це зараз. Тобто дітям треба казати, що в нас війна, щоб вони розуміли.
Рішення. Я цілий рік хотів в цей табір.
Москаля! Ви москаля! Ви москаля! Складайте руки!
The emphasis is on hatred of the other to build unity with the self. Notice the repeated emphasis on hatred for the Muscovites. Not the Kremlin and not the Russian military. This is hatred of non-Ukrainians, Russians in general. I doubt Azov would be so public with the reporters in this video. This footage was not just cut and edited, of course, and likely sliced for its own form of propaganda, but also taken with the trainers of the camp fully aware they were under watch from these journalists.
Ideologies, but also not wanting to join a liberalizing Western Europe.
Те ж саме ми хочемо привити до дітей, щоб вони любили Україну, щоб вони її не споплюжували. Покоління, яке зараз в нашій країні, воно повинно забезпечити фундамент для іншого покоління.
Now, this is a very recent example, but children military training camps are not unusual. Within the last 10 years, we've seen public reveals from ISIS training camp surface, where children are trained in hate and killing as well as martial structure and control. These are modern examples of what historically was standard among some of the fiercest and most dangerous martial societies of the world, where not just an emphasis of the physical training of the very young, but ideological drumbeats and propaganda were beaten into children. It's not enough to raise the young into ideological conformity, but also you need to build bonds that unify them against those unlike themselves. King Solomon in Proverbs summed up the purpose that to train a child in the way he should go, i.e. where you want him to go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. To build devotees to a fundamentalist way of life, you need to start young. You isolate the children from external voices, focus their time and attention so that their natural curiosity is not distracted away to other ideas and ways of life. This is the danger of our modern educational system, in that it allows for so many different ways of point of view that it can be overwhelming, distracting, and make it difficult to find a way forward in life. Now, the Spartans of ancient Greece are also a comparable lens and one of the earlier societies where children were raised from an extremely young age in a highly militarized, nationalistic, and brutal environment to build what we know today as some of the greatest soldiers and killers of the ancient world. And that children are being bred as beasts of war, ideologically propagandized and trained in the art of killing under 10 years old, is a deeply uncomfortable truth. This is not ancient history, this is today. And more troubling, how can a child raised in this kind of environment break such a cycle? Is it even possible? These were my thoughts as I began God of War 2018 in its latest release on the PC. I had played the original 3 God of War games, but was not prepared for the latest version of Kratos. Many reviews mention in passing the strength of the father-son relationship and how Kratos is such a good father and a good parent. So I want to focus on that question, which is that can a murderer, certainly one raised in this kind of militaristic society from a very young age, can someone like that be a good father? In my Arcane Respects Fathers video, I lean into this idea that Silco, though not necessarily a good man, he was a good father to Jinx. And in God of War, Kratos is a demigod. He's a bastard child of Zeus. And he was raised among Spartans, where the weak are culled by nature of the sword. He kills for his daughter, he kills for his mother and brother. He kills because the gods command him, and thus his killing is law, legal, acceptable. And yet this cyclical killing leads him to lose control and kill not just innocents, but he kills his own wife and daughter. He leads to the death of his brother and his mother, and pretty much everyone he loves. And as a result of this, he hates the gods, and more dangerously, as a god himself, loathes himself. This self-loathing comes into play later when we talk about his relationship with Atreus. What I've just clip noted for you briefly is the history of Kratos from the God of War games, God of War 1, 2, and 3, as well as some of the side games in the series. It's fantastical, hyperbolic in its reach and violence. However, it's grounded in the fact that Kratos was brutal in a brutal society, taught the imperative of strength, and pushed to become a killer through moral and societal pressure. However, just because Kratos is raised this way, his self-loathing comes from a self-awareness, that it's his continuous choices and lack of self-control and bloodlust that lead him to repeatedly end alone and those he loves dead. Another warrior character that I've read recently was Joe Abercrombie's first law, Logan, the Nine Fingers. He puts his self-loathing in very similar terms, and I quote, "I've no doubt the world would be a better place if I'd been killed years ago, but I haven't been, and I don't know why. There are few men with more blood on their hands than me. Always more enemies and fewer friends. Blood gets you nothing but more blood, and it follows me now, always like my shadow. And like my shadow, I can never be free of it. I should never be free of it. I've earned it. I've deserved it. I've sought it out, and such is my punishment."
We are gods, boy. And that makes us a target. From now until the end of days, you are marked. So I teach you to kill, yes, but in defense of yourself. Never as an indulgence.
However, the question of whether a murderer can be a good father is a complex one, firstly because of how he becomes a killer. If a child is taught and brainwashed by adults to kill, can they be held liable for their actions? As their physical ability of free choice is limited, they aren't developed enough to make their own decisions. Historically, and even today, child crime is not comparable to an adult, even for similar actions, even for children that are very close to being adults, teenagers. They're not physically or emotionally developed to internally distinguish right and wrong the way that adults are. They don't have the same controls, self-control. They are also utterly dependent for survival on the adults around them, which makes them desperate to please for their own survival. Children are inherently selfish, and training them to be altruistic and accepting is not a natural state of being. No lion convinces its cub to befriend the tiger or the gazelle. It's not in nature. As many National Geographic animal pairings as there are exceptions, this is not the natural state. And Kratos was raised in the way of Sparta. He was taught brutality of war. He kills throughout the series in the name of Sparta, the name of the gods, and for his own vengeance. The reason, though, becomes less and less important. As we finish God of War 3, another Abercrombie quote comes to mind, that if you want to be a new man, you have to stay in new places and do new things with people who never knew you before. Because if you go back to the same old ways, what else can you be but the same person? And this brings us to the older Kratos that we meet in God of War 2018. Having left Greece with his blood-soaked past behind him, he's living in ancient Scandinavia in Midgard with his son Atreus and his recently departed wife. He is determined to stay on the down low, but his wife's death, strange change in their forest, and the violent visit of the Norse god Baldur changes his options, and his reputation brings enemies to him like bees to honey. He cannot escape his past, and if he cannot, how can his son? Who is more stained than Kratos? How can he possibly be a good father, let alone find solace and redemption from his past? Can a murderer be a good father? These were the questions that I've raised over a couple of my Arcane videos when I discussed Silco and Marcus and father roles. In my last one with Marcus, he couldn't find redemption because he hit a point of no return and continued forward without changing his actions. Let's dig into Kratos and Atreus and many of the moments we'll see in Kratos' evolution as a parent, and how he sets the stage for his son to transcend his past come from his overcoming and working to improve despite his past.
She's ready. What are we hunting?
You are hunting deer.
Which way?
In the direction of deer.
Okay, this way.
Do not be sorry, be better. This is one of the most famous quotes from God of War 2018.
Now his guard is up. Only fire. Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
And this is pragmatism. But even if you don't know Kratos' past, you can see how this is projection. Hypocrisy is a dangerous blade, and Kratos is walking the entire game. He's pushing his son through a similar intense training in skill, loss, and grief, and yet expecting him to be better, and he's not even an adult. This line is not without empathy. Kratos is struggling emotionally with the loss of his wife, and his lashing out for a simple mistake here. He's not been around children much. He's never trained one in this capacity. So an important lesson we can take away early on for all fathers and mentors is that you will screw up. Don't let that stop you from trying, and don't beat yourself up about small mistakes. You got to focus on the vision of what you are doing better, and as we see with Kratos, it's about incremental improvement. This is key to learning any skill in life. Even if you're absolutely terrible at something, incremental effort, repetition with correct guidance, you can slowly but steadily improve. And while society doesn't impress the difficulty of learning how to be a parent, unfortunately, it is tremendously difficult to do right, even with experience, because the child is something that's ever changing. A simple task from A to B, you do A, you do B. But a child is a constantly evolving puzzle, constantly changing. And if a parent is not even settled with themselves, it makes raising a child significantly more difficult.
Wait for my mark. Relax. Do not think of it as an animal. It is simply a target. Clear your mind.
Training a skill, how to focus. Fathers are protectors, and the goal for children is to help them achieve independence. That is the longer-term goal for fathers. This is not only means application of the skill, but understanding ramifications of actions. A nice father, in quotations, who doesn't discipline and train his children, is in many ways as bad a father as one who outright treats his children poorly. Being on a time delay doesn't make a bomb less deadly, it just means it doesn't happen at the moment. Here we find that Kratos is helping Atreus kill his first animal, but notice how he does it with the absolute minimum he can to ensure that Atreus is the one who completes the task and takes ownership of it. This makes a major impression on Atreus. He's essentially owning the hunting task from the beginning to end. His father is not stepping in to solve it for him. At most, it's to help him over a few bumps and difficulties. Notice, and this comes up a few times in the game, Kratos struggles with physical contact. While this is not atypical of the stoicism the men of Sparta Kratos was raised with, I wondered several times, was this his internal struggle, that everyone he's cared about is dead, and usually due to him? Is he afraid he's going to get too attached to his son, especially after just losing his wife? He does this a few times throughout the game, especially when his wife comes up in discussion, and his hesitancy is a physical expression of his own internal concerns and hesitation.
That's what you get!
Boy,
Think I'm afraid of you!
you are not ready.
What? Are you serious?
You lost control.
That thing was trying to kill us. It's not like you don't get angry in a fight.
Anger can be a weapon. If you control it, use it. You clearly cannot. When you...
I haven't been sick in a long time. I'm better now.
These two clips, that you're not ready and you lost control, they follow one to the next, and I think the interesting lesson here in raising a child is understanding that sometimes in the moment, there's not a logical discussion to be had. Kratos saying you are not ready and refusing to address Atreus in his emotional state, and then we see that after a time for breather, then he discusses you lost control. He didn't explain prior because the boy really wasn't listening to him. He was focused on his own arguments, and by having this time delay, what this allows for is time to process and time to work down. And so if you find yourself in an argument, a heated argument with a child, it's often better to try to pause and regroup on it once the emotions are kind of tuned down and maybe stepped away from a little bit. Here, is he doing it for the child's benefit? That was my question in my head when I was watching this. Is this his own self-loathing that his son was giving into bloodlust in the moment and reminding him of his own difficulty controlling it? That was just some thoughts that crossed my mind.
Could have died. Never leave me alone again, all right?
All right.
Never leave me alone. This is a common problem, particularly for men, who are often the protectors with others dependent on them. Promising that you can make someone safe and promising not to leave them, while in the short term it feels good, it sets up the promise to be broken. Better to be direct and honest, but also sensitive. Understand where the question is coming from, really coming from. When someone asks, promise me this. As we see, this backfires when Kratos does temporarily leave Atreus.
You have to come back. You left me here alone.
Atreus?
Alone with him. He always leaves. He's never here. He doesn't want me and he never will. He doesn't talk to me. Doesn't teach me. It should have been him. Do you hear me? Him, not you. Except... I don't mean that.
I didn't know what to do! You left me here! Again! Why don't you care?
While the boy nearly died, he doesn't want to admit weakness in front of his father. Kratos gives him a few seconds to feel, but also reminds him that sometimes you have to close your heart. Too much feeling, too much empathy can lead to paralysis. And this is an ongoing danger in our ever-shifting, morally relativist modern world we live in. And why units like Azov and ISIS work to build a fanatical view, blacks and whites, of rights and wrongs, of us and them, is because while it is a form of brainwashing and a form of limiting someone's view on the world, it also prevents hesitation. It prevents an almost paralytic weakness of lack of conviction in what you do and why you do it. And this is why it is so difficult and dangerous when engaging against these organizations, because if as a society you don't have a conviction, you can't stand in the way of units like these.
I did what you said and it looked like it bounced off. Could the board be magical?
What do you think?
It looked weirder than any board I've ever seen.
This is a key component of teaching self-reliance and critical thinking, especially in a child. The key is to keep up curiosity and engagement, and lecturing at someone rarely does that. There's a reason Socratic method has been around for so long and used as a teaching tool. It builds curiosity and personal involvement. And Kratos asking Atreus for his thoughts first, it makes him feel like his opinion matters and gets him invested in the dilemma. This is valuable in business as well. When I was overseeing a larger team, I found that listening first, when we were discussing a problem, those working under me the room to voice their point of views and to discuss and hammer out some of the difficulties. And even if my final decision wasn't the most popular one, the team knew that I had heard them out, let them work through the problem together. This is key for a child too, because they should be invested in the problem solving. The best way to do that? Engage them with questions.
We use it as a last resort.
You're giving me your axe?
I'm letting you hold my axe. It is not a gift.
Still.
There's always a danger of entitlement when raising children, especially in a world where their core needs and safety are met. And for example, a child should not think, this is my house I'm living in, or my new car that their dad just drove up in front of the house. My son, for example, will sometimes say, let's go to your car, or let's go to dad's car. He knows it's not his car. He did not earn it. It is not his toy. It is not his thing that he got. And it's not his simply because he is my son. In the longer view, this helps ground a child in the world of ownership and accountability, that you need to earn something, and that ownership gives you the ability to share what you have with others. If a person believes they are entitled to things, that leads down a dangerous road in the longer term. These are exaggerations comparing a father teaching to a mother, and this is part of the problem we have in today's society with such a high rate of single parenthood, that parenting teaching styles are not the same. Atreus spent most of his life with his mother, and his frustration on not being prepared to be raised by his father's style is evident throughout the game. Sure, Kratos isn't helping exactly, as he's new to the whole father-mentor figure thing, but it's the child's bewilderment thinking he must not care and not understanding his father is very different from his mother. These two clips reinforce the difficulty of a child growing up without a father can run into. He does not know his father's ways, and often will misinterpret male focus on stoicism, emotional control, and discipline as a coldness or lack of caring.
Oh, she's not there.
Not like you would even care if she was.
Mind your tongue, boy! Until our journey is over, one of us must remain focused. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. Mourn how you wish. Leave me to my own.
This shows us how a child's thoughts are tied to emotion and fleeting, and this is why it's important for a parent to be stoic in the face of a child's fleeting emotions. Say, a child yells, "I hate you," when they don't get their way in something. It's less important in the moment when the child is saying, and more how the parent is handling the challenge, the emotional undercurrent of the child's anger. It's rare that a child truly hates a parent when they say a comment like this. These are outbursts that are testing how a parent handles their outbursts.
Wars are fought for two things: survival or advantage. Battles may be won by the better soldier. Wars are won by those who are willing to sacrifice everything to ensure victory.
Kratos' point here that wars are won by those who will do anything to ensure victory, this is true, and it harkens back to his past. It's easier for someone to sacrifice everything to ensure victory when they have little to lose. But what's not mentioned here is that a person who is willing to sacrifice anything for victory, and maybe even does, may not have much left after they win. Cue stage left. Kratos.
I'm fine. Just lost my balance for a moment. You know, for someone so strong, you sure worry a lot.
It serves me well, and how I keep us alive.
I guess. Not a terribly fun way to live, though.
Protector and provider is core to male biology and how men have been raised and functioned for millennia. To be an effective protector, fathers need to anticipate short and long-term dangers and considerations. Classic with great power comes great responsibility, and responsibility is stressful. Men are often the ones who have to think through the consequences and bear the brunt of bad choices. In society, for example, for war, men are the ones who are drafted. If a society comes to war, it's the men usually who pay the price. You are counted on, relied upon, and to be a leader you need to think through and ahead. Kratos was a general. He led Spartan soldiers. Worrying unnecessarily is one thing. Worrying with intent is key to survival, especially of those you protect.
Boy, the longer you wait to tell him his true nature, the more damage you do. He will resent you, and you may lose him forever.
There is much about me I would not have him know.
So you value your privacy more than your son, eh?
I'm going to cut off your head now.
Fair enough.
There are things children should know and things they should not know. Sometimes a parent will think by explaining or giving a full story they're helping the child, but understanding where someone is at is key. YouTube has a series called The 5 Levels of Teaching, published through Wired, and is a perfect example of where the level of the student is key to how one explains something. Kratos is balancing telling his son, who's growing up quickly, the truth versus everything else the child does not know, the context around those truths. On the flip side, how a parent reacts to a child wanting to teach them is also a way to show and build trust.
Come look. Let me show you how to read this.
That is not necessary.
Taught me
Maybe
so
the child
much.
knows you're not telling
Let
them
me teach you
everything,
something.
but if you're willing to give and take with them, it makes it a little easier for a child to
You already
go
speak
along
it.
with not being
Learning to read won't
explained.
be that hard.
Clip 20.
I know how to read, boy. Just not this tongue. I did this to him. Will you help me?
This is a bit of messy psychology here, but the point is generally true that Kratos' frustration and difficulty with his son is largely around the way the child is a mirror image of himself. He sees his own behaviors made manifest outside himself, and his hatred of himself and his past choices comes out of him. It is dangerous, and it's a common line for parents raising children, that children will often do behaviors that really drive the parent up the wall, but children are rarely doing things on their own. They're imitators. They typically watch and absorb what their parents do, or their guardians, whoever's caring for them. And if they happen to express the negative traits, it's usually a reflection that the parent is expressing those negative traits, or those around them. It may be another child, maybe a sibling. Often a child misbehaving is imitating the parent's bad behavior, and that means that self-awareness and self-improvement for the parent is what's key, not lashing out at the child. And if Kratos' case, his son is bloodthirsty, like we saw earlier, Kratos' anger is more a reflection of his own grief and self-loathing than what his son is actually doing in the moment. Clip 28. Kratos reveals the truth to his son. He tells him he is a god. But being a master of life and death, essentially a killer, can also be a curse, and Kratos is careful to emphasize this. We know that Atreus quickly grabs onto his godhood nature to justify killing because he can, reminiscent of young Kratos. Power is a corrupting force, and power over life and death is the greatest that a man has. And this is why Kratos is so desperate to raise his son to be better than himself, because in many ways, his redemption can no longer come from himself. His actions that he has done cannot be fixed, cannot be forgiven. Clip 29. Responsibility is far greater when you're a god. Kratos' point to Atreus that you must be better than me is that power comes from the heart, but it's only if tempered by discipline and self-control. This is all Sparta background at work, and we know Kratos has lost a lot of this in his rise to godhood and his quest for revenge. But he knows his son can potentially be better. And as Kratos is changing, he hopes that that change will come through on his son and will carry forward.
Did I tell you that I have a son too?
On the day you were born, I made 2 knives, mixing metals from my home and from this land. One for myself, and when you were ready, one for you. Today is that day.
So I'm a man now. Like you?
No. We are not men. We are more than that. The responsibility is far greater. And you must be better than me. Understand?
Teach you to kill in self-defense because you are marked. Now practically, killing heedlessly breeds enemies, and the longer lived, the longer time it has to come around and bite you. And rightfully, we ask, how do you know that there are consequences? And we see that Kratos hasn't been fully honest with him. Kratos is functionally telling Atreus one thing, and yet his actions and hiding of his past will bite him down the road.
You are marked. So I teach you to kill, yes, but in defense of yourself. Never as an indulgence.
Nobody cared about him anyways. What's the difference?
There are consequences to killing a god!
Why? How do you know? How do you know?
Watch your tone, boy.
Whatever.
We see that good parents trying to shield children too much to keep them wrapped in a protective web usually leads to more damage than good. This is the balancing act Kratos is struggling with we just saw in the past clip, and much of the time, he's managing to overcome it. I expect in Ragnarok, the sequel, that's due to come out probably next year, we're going to find that Atreus learns about Kratos' past, and all these lessons that have been stacked up built on this notion that Kratos has been improving, and that he's hidden a lot of how he knows what he's teaching, will come out. And that's going to be a major clash in the game. Will that unmake this whole bridging that Kratos has been working with his son on?
So, why'd you want to name me Atreus? I know it can't be for a god.
No. He was a soldier. A Spartan.
A great warrior?
All Spartans are great warriors. We trained from birth. Our lives were discipline, duty, battle, and death. Life was grim, and we greeted it grimly. But Atreus of Sparta was unlike the rest of us. He wore a smile even in the worst of times. He was happy. He inspired us to hope that though we were machines of war, yet there was humanity in us.
Of Atreus. It's interesting that this is the very end of the game, that Spartans like himself were self-aware that life was grim, and they themselves approached life grimly and seriously, because they had known little but pain, loss, and suffering. And having Atreus as the light is a mirror image for Kratos' hope, both in his past as well as his future. It bridges the two, that his son Atreus can be something good and positive and lead him from his grim and serious, unforgivable past. So we come back around, seeing Kratos' development throughout the course of the game and seeing him come all the way to the end, where he's gotten to a point where Atreus has balanced a little bit better the various lessons that Kratos has taught him, but also that they have an understanding of one another. Can a murderer be a good father? I think yes. 3 videos into this topic and having continued to think through it, I think that someone who is bad, so to speak, can be, but only if he works to improve his moral character. Because if a child sees his father's actions without the context of improvement, he will mirror those actions. And while forgiveness, even redemption, may not be possible, a person can accept what they've done is unforgivable and still take steps to improve themselves. This is what Kratos has done through the course of God of War 2018. That in his journey with Atreus, he learns he may not be able to find peace or redeem himself. But by setting examples of growth and being there for his son to help him avoid the same mistakes, this is how he succeeds as a good father, not necessarily as a good man. as someone with a dark past, he can leave a brighter future.